in this episode.
Some of these discussions should shift a bit. So they should shift to the question of how, not whether. And
Right.
to really see, okay, how can we maximize the gain? How this can be done? How do we communicate to our students who are using it even when we don't allow it officially? How do we communicate? Sorry?
Which is all of them. Everyone's using it. So, yeah.
I mean, also professors are using it, and that is then this interesting question of kind of what is then the university if they are submitting, like the South Park scenario, students are submitting essays written by generative AI, and then professors are grading essays with generative AI, and then there is their education. And there are even articles about this that students noticed that professors use the AI tools to grade, and in some universities this was even permitted. And then they complain about this, and then they complain this is not what I'm paying for. So this is a bit kind of this consumer approach. But then it's this other question. Okay, how should we assess? Should we shift the way we assess? And all of this has to shift somehow dynamically. So the questions for me are much more in what to do in the present situation, because it's not that we can just close our eyes and everything will. We say it's forbidden, and then if it's forbidden, no one will do it.
ChatGPT has unraveled the entire academic project, writes James Walsh in a viral article on New York Magazine titled, "Everyone is Cheating Their Way Through College." Well before the current AI boom, the ideology of technology was sustained on the promise that it would make our lives more efficient and humans more productive. Indeed, modern societies are built on the notion that technology in itself is a social good. And AI in particular has captured our collective imagination with the promises of leading to unfathomable productivity, untold superintelligences, and fundamentally revolutionizing civilization. In vogue questions about artificial general intelligence or the AI singularity still remain open. But a salient question that warrants immediate attention beyond the mythology of AI is whether the so-called productivity imbued by AI unequivocally serves education for the better or, at its worst, destroys it.
So you smart, huh?
No.
I thought your head would be bigger. God damn.
Perhaps it's at the heart of these normative inquiries, investigations, and questions that data and algorithms meet philosophy. In this episode, social epistemologist of science and philosopher of education, Dr Vlasta Sikimic, in her fourth appearance on the podcast, discusses whether AI and large language models have, in fact, unraveled the entire academic project. And if so, how should we reconceive education and what remains for the university? All of which questions which we will analyze after this quick PSA. As you may know, I've mentioned multiple times that I'll never have advertisers or sponsors on this podcast. Frankly, I think we live in a society of excess and overconsumption, and I don't want to contribute to that by selling you another product or service that you probably don't need. That being said though, and forgive me for the tautology, we, for better or worse, live in the world we live in. I run this podcast on top of doing a full-time job while doing research for my master's, and if I am to sustain this project, I need some financial backing. So if you have the means, please do consider supporting me on Patreon, Substack, or even PayPal. All the links will be in the show notes. And if you're wondering, what are the perks? What are you gonna get? The honest answer is nothing. That's right, there's no exclusive behind the paywall goodies. As far as I'm concerned, you're simply supporting this project if you think the already free content that's always going to be free is of any value to you. I sincerely do want to thank the existing supporters, and if you're considering supporting my work, please do so only if you have the means, especially in our precarious times. Alright, now to the episode. I was thinking, Vlasta, before we even discuss anything AI, any of this kind of in vogue topics, I kind of want to ask you this naive, really foundational question, and the question is, what is education? And the reason I want to start here is because, in a way, I feel like some of us are quite biased and in our own bubble because we love learning, we love reading books, all of these discussions. And like for us, in a way, education is it's not a means to an end. It is the end, right? Like it's, at least for me, I don't want to do anything else other than just like learn and discover things. I really don't care about anything else apart from that. But then when I'm going to call this the LinkedIn ideology. The LinkedIn ideology, I've seen a lot where, university or college, as Americans say, it's treated as like it's an instrumentalist. It has like, people take an instrumentalist perspective where, okay, the purpose of university or college is to get a job, do your degree, and then go and get a job. And then now the mindset is, don't even go to college. You don't need college anymore. You could just go straight to work. College is useless. It's not going to help you with your sales skills or whatever. And I'm not saying those things aren't important. I'm just saying this is what I've seen. And in fact, for the audience, I'll put an overlay of this like post for me, which quintessentially captures this mindset where this person shared this student has gone into like student debt. And the person's like, oh, why are you wasting your time in college? You don't learn how to sell. You don't learn B2B sales, that sales in college. Like, what's the use in going into debt? And then I was thinking, like, okay, I mean, why is this idea prevalent in our society where education's always a means to an end? So I thought, in your view, if someone just asks from you, what is education? And then perhaps as a follow-up, what do you think is the purpose of university? What would you say to that?
Thank you for this rich question, Rahul. Let me first say, it's not in the capitalist world. It might have what you said, the prevailing instrumental value. But if you come from a different paradigm where I grew up, it's not always considered like that. It's considered also just intrinsically valuable. And exactly, people even studied back in the days in former Yugoslavia and just listened to some courses without getting a degree. So it was considered prestigious that you just say, oh, I attended these lectures by this person, or I attended 1 year of a psychology degree, even though I have a degree in philosophy, or I don't have any degree, but I was just attending the university, and no one was going into debt because of it, because it was for free. And when the education is for free, then it also comes from the perspective of the state that it's something valuable. And why would it be valuable for the state that we all maximize our learning potential? Well, there are different theories. Some say it's because of democracy. In a democracy, in order to find the democracy functions, we need informed citizens. To have informed citizens, they need education. Otherwise, there is no point of voting if you're not informed, if you cannot process the information. Then there is, and the democracy also not only functions through voting, but also through deliberation and participation in the political discourse. And for that, we need to be politically informed, but also socially informed, and need to have some education. Then there is this other idea that comes maybe more from the left-wing paradigm, and this is we should maximize our own potentials. We should have the opportunity to maximize our own potential. And I also want to put a caveat there that unfortunately not every left reasoning was that understanding and supportive of education. Quite some of these paradigms were considering education as a luxury, and were not allowing, that happened in East Germany, unfortunately, they were limiting how many members of one family could study, for instance. And that is, of course, highly disturbing.
That's true. Yeah.
So there we have to be careful. But if we are considering what is the purpose of human life, what is the purpose of our society, if we want some epistemic and moral progress, if we want to do something moral, we have to first know what is the right thing to do. So the knowledge comes, and then it's the action. And in this context, so in this philosophical perspective, we argue for the intrinsic value of education. Now with AI, we also see a lot can be outsourced to machines, but our abilities, they stay. And then within the instrumental paradigm, that's something we will discuss probably today, and hopefully interesting for our viewers. is what is still left from the universities, which do need to change, in my opinion, what is still left, what they still have to provide. And there are some of the main topics which people say, okay, a stamp of approval, that someone can actually perform a certain task, so that the professor is there to assess, then that they serve for networking. But then I will push for this third Humboldtian idea that it's actually the purpose of education to be exposed and to spend significant amount of time on developing our capacities. And the last point, which I found very interesting, and that was an anecdote, but a very good one. In high school, everyone complains, like we are learning a lot of things which are not useful later in life. And then our teacher of Serbian language and literature said, that's true. You are now learning a lot of things that you will not use later in life. But if you had all this time free and had to structure it yourself, you would for sure learn less. And I found that as a very good point, because behind the educational system, people did think about how to construct each subject, and some experts were reasoning about it. And the goal, all of these people, maybe they make mistakes, but their goal is indeed to better our lives, to better our understanding of the world, and also to make us participate better in the society. Education has also not only the knowledge, but also this social knowledge, social understanding, social skills, psychological skills, and it's supposed to develop all of those. And someone did think about it. Again, they maybe made mistakes, but the intention is definitely there, and it is still the best thing that we have, I would say.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I would say, because I come at this as a student, right? Like I'm a student at university. I was also before, when I did my bachelor's. And it's a weird thing, because it's sort of like all of the information that I'm learning right now, apart from the assignments and all of that, like the essays and leaving that aside, but just like the pure raw information, I could get all of that just for free on the internet. However, I know for a fact that if I didn't enroll in a master's program, nor did I do a bachelor's degree, or even like another kind of diploma, I'll never learn the way I'm learning right now without being a part of some kind of institution or having those necessary structures for learning. So there's this kind of paradox in learning where if you have too much freedom, you can't learn, sort of like. It's like, in a way, I don't know what the term here is, but you need, like, which here's where I think you need teachers, you need mentors, you need people that have kind of been thinking about this for a long time, and they know what works, what doesn't work. Doesn't mean they're perfect, of course. However, it's like this ongoing dialectic a student has with the teacher. And I find that, like, that's, I don't know, which is why now in this conversation, I'm really interested on that comment you made about universities need to change. It's like, okay, how can we, it's like, now that we have all of this technology, AI, information, all of this, well, what's the space that the university will go and fill, or the gap that the university will capture? And that's, I think, again, at least for me, that's a philosophical question. I don't know how, you can't like answer that empirically. Like, I don't know how to even design an experiment to answer that. But yeah, just a few, I guess, starting thoughts on my end as a student.
There are definitely some empirical ways to test educational interventions and to test how different educational approaches are working, so whether they're working well or not. One of these ways is to test the amount of knowledge obtained, but the other one, like PISA testing and so on.
Sure.
But the other ways are also to check the student satisfaction, because that does matter, and we should listen to it. But of course, what is there, the normative, the philosophical aspect is kind of what exactly we want to optimize for. And so we can test what was the effect of a certain intervention, but what do we want to intervene on? And do we want to intervene on the skills which are preparing us for the lifelong learning? I would say yes. So maybe it's not about knowing the facts as much, even though some facts are helpful, but it's also about being able to adapt to different situations. Are we also, do we also want that our students develop ways of self-regulating? Yes, definitely. Do we want that our students understand how to kind of curiosity in the terms of intellectual virtues? So do we want them to be able to understand which content will provide epistemic value and which content will provide less epistemic value? Sure, I'm very excited to read gossips about Shakira, but I know that's not the same that doesn't bring the same epistemic value as when I am doing some work and trying to learn what is now happening with the large language models to be able to follow these trends and these developments in a proper way and form my opinion about it. Right? So we make these decisions on a daily basis, and to be able to make them, we need certain skills activated and developed. And that's something that philosophy says, kind of what are these epistemic values? What are the non-epistemic values that we want through our education? So that's where the normative part comes from. And to address or to touch upon the second very challenging part of your great question is kind of what can happen, how the universities will shift. We will see. But where I definitely think we should increase our attention is exactly in building these lifelong skills, lifelong learning skills, making students capable of doing that, making them capable of self-regulating, exposing them, of course. I mean, this networking aspect does matter, but not in this very basic sense, okay, I have a connection, but also in a sense, I know how to communicate with people. I know how to have empathy for people. I know how to listen to opposing viewpoints and still not, I know how to participate in an academic discourse without feeling threatened or without threatening someone, but to be able to say, okay, this is a legitimate viewpoint. I disagree, but I respectfully disagree. I can be wrong, so I have some intellectual humility about my viewpoints. So to make us successfully communicate with each other, listening to each other, also developing some patience in us, developing some mental strength in this sense. And I think it's very important because I, as a teacher, now say this. For me, it's very important that I have some academic freedom, not only in what I am researching, but also in what I am teaching, and even in the teaching style that I'm using. Because I think when I align my teaching with my core values and with my research, that will bring the highest use for my students. And for my students, I want them to be inspired. They can challenge my opinions, but I love, there is nothing more gratifying than when you give a lecture to a large audience and get an applause from your students. That means something moved them. And that matters. And then they go home and they say, okay, we listened to something that we now find valuable. And that makes us think further and develop our own opinions.
I took a few notes here from what you said, Vlasta. So, first of all, you mentioned this idea of capabilities. And the moment you said that, my head went to, Martha Nussbaum and Amartya Sen's capabilities approach they take for development, the Human Development Index. They think it should be based on not on like expressing freedom in a vague sense, but rather the capabilities to partake in a democracy. And one thing they say there is, as you properly mentioned, is education. For us to play our civic roles and be a part of a democracy, education scaffolds or gives us the affordances, even in a way, to partake in a democracy and creates those capabilities. So in a way, it's like, if you want to be a good citizen, it seems like just having the right to vote isn't enough. That's probably the bare minimal starting point. There are many other structures needed for that. So that's really interesting you mentioned that, and I think there's a lot more thinking that can go into that. The other thing, this is really interesting, this point you made about kind of your little comment you made on the networking thing, right? There's so much I can say here, but I find that the term networking has become so completely bastardized, and just the idea is like, oh, I'm just going to grow my LinkedIn connections so that I have a bunch of academics on my LinkedIn, or like a bunch of some business people. And then that's that. I just have like Netflix. I have people I can rely on. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're talking about is more of like, how can I engage in an epistemic community and think with them? And, if I disagree with an idea, how does one learn to disagree without being antagonistic? While at the same time, how does one have the confidence to even articulate your own ideas? And so perhaps can you talk a bit more about like that other comment also related to that you made, that as a teacher, you would like the academic freedom to kind of, I don't know if the term is experiment, but also like bring your own way of teaching, your own style of pedagogy into how you interact with your students.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so let's start. So the
Sorry,
first
that was a lot there. I know. Yeah, apologies.
Sure. The first point was about this democracy, and there, of course, we agree. I think it's also important what you briefly mentioned to keep in mind that education should also help us for building individual freedom and individual freedom of thought. So it shouldn't be indoctrination. Mm-hmm. It has to empower the individual. And that's why I like this virtue approach very much, because it always says the virtue is in the middle. So we have to balance between all these different roles that we have in the society, and individual freedom does matter. So unfortunately, even though Plato, we care about Plato, but we prefer the truth. So we love Plato. It's definitely one of my favorite philosophers. But we don't want that the purpose of a human is to serve to the state, to the republic. We want, I at least, want this individual freedom, and then, okay, what the state can also do for the individual, and what our society can do for us as individuals to develop as much as possible and to be as happy as possible, to live our fullest lives. So that is, for me, important, that this is preserved, that and it's a thin line, and that does demand awareness. So we don't want indoctrination. We really want people who are able to critically think. That's one of the main subjects that philosophers are teaching, critical thinking, and that's something which I believe is now needed more than ever. And now we can even talk about AI literacy and critical thinking in the age of AI. That's now even recognized not only by UNESCO, but it's more and more recognized by each ministry and even the European Commission and so on, as something as of the high priority for the society. The second, could you remind me what was the second point?
Of course.
Yes.
The idea of like, I guess, let's call it how to partake in an epistemic community.
Yes. I will just use a very simple example to make this very clear to everyone.
And concrete, yeah.
So when my students started in one course having presentations, after the group presentations, they prepared in groups, then they had to have a Q&A. And in this, they were the first year students, so that's completely normal. That stuff happens, or maybe some were second year. But anyway, it was the beginning of their journey at the university. So they had some knowledge, but still also stuff to develop. And then they taught and that they should kind of be very critical to each other, and that will kind of bring them points in my eyes. And because they were the groups on the same day, they discuss the same topics, but they have different kind of angles, and kind of they felt it's really important kind of who did better, which group did better. So and to do that, they were even saying, oh, you even challenged kind of their slides, or you even challenged their background on the slides.
So like a zero-sum game, like a win-loss kind of, yeah.
Exactly. And then I explained to them, and even posted on Canvas that's some tool, educational tool, which informs the whole students in the class. But then we spent more time into kind of how to communicate, and what is a useful question, and what is a good reaction to a question. So first of all, if you're receiving a question which is antagonistic, you shouldn't jump on it. You have to say, thank you for your question. Thank you for engaging with my presentation. And that is also a very useful skill if you at any defense. So bachelor defense, master's defense, PhD defense. Or if you're receiving any type of feedback, you have to thank someone for spending their time, for engaging, for being willing to ask you a question, because that's already great. Otherwise, they can be completely silent, right? So you thank these people, and you also try to think, okay, what you can learn from it, how can you answer in a constructive way? And that's very important. So not to get defensive, but to take into account the question, even when it's critical. But also when asking a question, to try to contribute to the discussion. Because, and indeed, as you said, it's not a zero-sum game. The more people can get high grades, and they do get high grades, and that's all, and the grade is not even the point. And also you want to be, you want to, I hope, help your colleagues and kind of to think what we like in this term of social epistemology, that we all collectively learn as much as possible. And teachers usually, I don't know for everyone, but I at least like that in my class, all students learn as much as possible. So that is, and that they learn from each other. So this peer learning is something which I consider valuable. And I think it helped when they learned. And I also told them, well, you're now on the next level. You are now in this academic setup where there is also some type of dignity with which you should present yourself. And I think that resonates with everyone, because that puts us all on a kind of higher, the stakes are higher. We think of ourselves maybe in a higher way, but in a constructive way, right? So we won't have some intellectual dignity, not to ask mean questions or not to respond in ways which are not constructive and so on. And that's not easy. That's some type of intellectual maturity.
Yeah, I mean, I would even say like this is why, man, I'm so, as much as I love the internet, and I mean, I met you through the internet, I came across your work through the internet, obviously there's untold amount of benefit of the internet, but this like whole mindset of like when you want to debate something or talk about something, it has to be a zero-sum game. It's so internet brained, because if you look at the internet, the way it's even structured, social media, is what gets attention is controversy, conflict. So it's like you can't even, in a way, if someone agrees with a certain statement, if it's a post or a blog post or a podcast, they wouldn't even probably leave a comment saying, hey, I agree with this. It's because it's like, it's only what the impetus to go and leave a comment or engage with something. Generally, the energy, it comes up. It comes from a place only if you disagree, or if you have to say something to negate the person, and in a way, like, put them down. And that's why, here's where, okay, different topic here, but I'm just going to mention this. I'm still of two minds of like online Zoom learning, whether it's always a good thing, because I think it even though there are advantages, especially for people like me who are like working full-time and trying to also study, at the same time, there's something where you have to, because we're embodied beings. I mean, this is cognitive science, right? Being in the room with your peers and your teacher, it's not the same as just being on a Zoom chat the whole day. You miss out on so much of that kind of physical embodied interaction you have with another human being.
Yes, and there I think you tapped into a very good point, right? So why this is good to have? That's because to have online learning platforms. That's because then I can teach. I can scale up my course. I can teach enormous amount of people. I can reach them. Also for people who are working and want to learn, this is very helpful because there is a flexible time. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it also, there is another thing, is there is a difference between an adult who tries to learn and imagine a 6-year-old who is supposed to sit during COVID online and try to learn. And of course, and why? Well, some of the differences is because also certain skills are already developed, right? So self-regulation, concentration, and so on. But even for adults, of course, it's much nicer to have this live interaction, which you just mentioned. but it is not possible to reduce the education, especially not from the very early on, to online platforms. And there are these interesting, so now some sci-fi ideas, just to spark our imagination, that VRs or other types of extended realities and so on could help in that we are even connected. So imagine now that we are having this conversation in a VR, so we see each other in 3D maybe, or there are some more exciting things happening, and it's much more immersive. Or we are trying to teach history by putting our students in a setup that they're seeing like certain battlefield, or that they are seeing a certain important talk of some president or some important historic event, and then they really kind of have a very immersive experience. But it is still questionable how much that can replace the human contact, and how healthy it is that this is replaced completely. So those technologies, I see a lot of potential in them. I find them very interesting, and I think that will be explored further and further. It's not easy to explore them because the softwares and even hardwares change, and then it's hard to kind of to do these controlled experiments. But that's a new branch of research in human technology interaction, and with a potential application in education.
No doubt. Yeah, I mean, I think even in Australia, I think Monash University has even a lab, and HCI, Human Computer Interaction Lab, where they kind of do research this exact thing, where, immersive learning, and all the way from like higher education, but even like in schools and stuff. But of course, with children, you got to be extra careful as to how these technologies affect them. Excellent, Vlasta. Okay, so now I kind of want to get into more of your work. Before I ask this big provocative question, is AI a threat to education? I want to first just so that, the reason I'm starting here is because like I kind of want the listener to know.
But sorry, Rahul, but maybe you want still that I respond about this to this question on academic freedom and educational freedom.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you mentioned before. Yes, please go ahead. This is me. I'm getting too excited here. I was gonna bring up your study, but
no, it's I find it important because we often talk about academic freedom. And academic freedom in terms of how important it is when we have the hard political times, that politics should not influence, from Max Weber, these ideas.
You mean like right now? You mean like right now, in our contemporary times, hard political times?
Well, yeah, also in these times, right, where this polarization is happening, when the polarization is something that's being glorified, and where one view doesn't allow the other view to exist, and so on. But we also had it historically, and when Max Weber was talking about this was in the context of rising Nazism in Europe and so on. And those are very, very important topics, and people are sensitive, especially in Europe, in the academic freedom. But they're less aware that academic freedom comes with the freedom in education, especially when we talk about the university level of education. Because at the university level of education, these people are hired as researchers, as academics, as people who are shaping and shifting our value system. They have to be sensitive, and there I think that what the knowledge happens and the way how we are steering the society happens within the universities, also in interaction with students. And our students are pushing us to change and to understand and to adapt. Of course, it should also happen, and that's my opinion, and that's why I think the university needs to shift and open up more in the discourse and in the dialogue with the public.
What do you mean? Sorry, can I interrupt for a second? What do you mean by students are pushing you to change and adapt? Can you elaborate on that statement?
Yes. So student movements, again, also historically, changed significantly political paradigms, but also knowledge paradigms in the world. But it's even on a more basic thing, right? So if the students come to me and they're interested in exploring certain topics, I'm sensitive to that. I notice, okay, there is interest to that. that is something maybe more contemporary, but it's always the dialogue between the student and the professor, and the students are the heart of the university. So it matters a lot. Okay, maybe I don't like these organic paradigms, so I will refrain from them, but the students are essential for universities, and what students bring is a great contribution to the whole society, because they have a lot of time to also think about these challenges of the society, and that matters a lot. And then this idea, again, I like this Humboldtian idea, because now we wonder, okay, AI can do so many things for us, maybe write the homework, maybe do this, maybe do that. But what it doesn't do is this kind of what a human has to experience by themselves, is to be present, is to engage, to give this input to the whole community of what's going to change. So when we go to the university, we come to listen to maybe, I don't know, Vlasta Sikimić, and we want to listen to her opinions, and we find her lectures engaging, and then we will form our own opinion based on this. But it's not that there is some master program which is structured that has to be followed. Of course, modulo something has to be followed, otherwise we don't have the fairness in grading and so on, and educational level and giving a diploma. But still, there has to be some freedom, and also these courses, they do get adjusted and readjusted. And we cannot teach the same way how we were teaching 10 years ago. We cannot teach the same topics as the 10 years ago. We cannot even assess in the same way as we were assessing 10 years ago. And we also have to listen to this feedback, to what is resonating, what makes sense. But I can only be inspiring if I am inspired myself. At least that's what I would say. And it's very hard for me to do something that doesn't align with my values. So I think it's a privilege to be a university lecturer. It does come with quite some responsibility. And I do think that it requires certain freedom, because if you would now all of a sudden be told you have to teach creationism to your students, that would be a problem for me.
Yeah. And also, I mean, okay, I'm sorry, I have to say this. It is completely out of topic for today's discussion, but you said something like, it's kind of a contemporary ideology that like a university should be student-centric. As a student, I disagree. Because I actually don't know if it's really a good idea where our culture kind of like almost, it's as if, okay, let me see if I could articulate this right. At least in Australia, it seemed the university, not amongst everyone, but like the broader public sees the university as like a service. So it's as if the professors and the senior lecturers are supposed to like serve us and give us the service of education. Now, I completely disagree. Like, education isn't like some commodity where our students go because we're paying, or like, our government Hexter is paying for us. Therefore, the professors are supposed to like serve us and give us, impart their education. I think in a way, I would even say there probably should be a bit more of a deflationary model of what the role a student plays at a university, where it's like, hey, you're going to this place where you're gonna, number one, face uncomfortable ideas at times, things that probably, like, for example, if you grew up in a fundamentalist religious home and they taught creationism or something, and then you go and learn the theory of evolution. Or if you grew up in a very conservative traditional society, you learn about equality amongst sexes and genders, and you're introduced to like gender theory and all of these ideas that really subvert what you thought. And in a way, for me, that's great. That's the whole purpose of university shouldn't be to like cater for your needs constantly as a student, but also in a way to, mature one as a person and cultivate a sense of what it means to engage with these difficult ideas. And then this like very like student-centered, service-based education sometimes for me doesn't do that, because it's like, oh, just go get the degree, and as I really get annoyed by this, like, okay, get all the grades, pass. There's a saying here in Australia, they go, C's get degrees or P's get degrees. So the idea is you just get pass and then go and get a job. And that's where I'm like, no, maybe you should, as a student, have a bit of humility and be like, look, these people have kind of been doing this for a long time. Don't think you know it all, and go with an open mind to learn, and also to face a bit of discomfort. Anyway, now I'm like ranting, but do you kind of get where I'm a little bit skeptical of that student-centered narrative in our culture?
Yes. And I cannot agree more with this, that it is not a commodity, it is not a service. I definitely don't feel like I should be there to provide a service. And because that doesn't even bring enough responsibility to either parties. So that is not, and if this is the baseline from which we are starting, then of course it's very hard to reach this higher, more mature level of intellectual debate. But if students, that's at least my hope, if students receive kind of respect from us, and that they also understand the importance of their role and some dignity in their role, so that they are not just there as customers, but that they are there to contribute to the society and to themselves. Then in that case, of course, we should say, yeah, your voice matters a lot. Your sensitivity to which are important research questions that you want to explore for your master thesis, that matters a lot. And we have to follow, like, it happens I enter the classroom, I say to them, look, all of us together have more knowledge than me individually. and that is a fact. And now it's a question, how are we going to learn from each other? How are we going to pool this knowledge? Sure, I have more experience in philosophy than them, but I guess that most of them, maybe someone comes and then knows even more than me. But the point is there that kind of, I think this empowerment is important, but empowerment not in the sense of being entitled to demand a grade to whatever, but
that's what I mean. Yeah.
But empowerment in the sense also of some epistemic responsibility for the contribution that's being made in the university, because it is, I think it's a very nice experience that should be cherished.
No doubt. I mean, because after I was done with my bachelor's, Vlasta, I took a small break and I was like in the corporate world, right? I couldn't wait till I was back at the university, because it's a great environment to be amongst people who are learning, and that's why I was also like really I view this kind of education as a service with like a very critical eye, because education is not a service. It's not like you ordering an Uber, it's not like that. And then also, I sound like a curmudgeon now, I'm sorry, but we live in a very particularly narcissistic culture. So it's like everyone feels very entitled that they're supposed to always get something from like teachers or whoever. But I think, a bit of humility always helps us students. But anyway,
yes, but that is an important. That is really an important point that So I noticed, for instance, sometimes students have this culture, and it works with different professors differently, that they complain about their grades, that they want a higher grade, and that comes from this service mentality. Maybe even what you said, kind of this entitlement. I guess narcissism is very strong, but I mean, in that.
Sorry, I'm being provocative in my fashion.
Yeah. I mean, it is that culture. I don't think that student complaining about a grade. But in any case, it's being, because I mean, it worked. Some professors operate like that. They then give higher grades to people who complain and so on. And that's, for instance, something I really didn't like. And I always kind of try to explain this to students. When I grade, I spend significant time on this. And it is important that it's also kind of respected. Okay, of course, sometimes maybe someone makes mistake. It never happened to me till now. It might happen in the future. But I don't like it as a system that people massively complain. And I also tell them, well, it's also a little bit about learning to accept the feedback.
Yeah.
Because that's also part, because you will receive harsh feedback or nice feedback or different type of feedback throughout your life, but you have to move on. And the purpose is that you move on and that you learn and so on. And it's not kind of this, okay, who complains most gets most. And that's issue. As far as, so at the universities, for us, it's kind of, I guess, still okay, but I guess it depends also on the university. But I heard that this issue is stronger for the primary school teachers, and because they get complaints not by the students, but by the parents.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then it really is becoming very invasive. And then there's this distorted idea, okay, I'm only a good parent if I fight with the teacher for the grade of my child. But that's really not the message we should want to send. But if everybody else does it and then you don't do it, then maybe your child, it's becoming rather toxic. And it shouldn't be like that. I think it's an important lesson to learn to get the feedback and move on. It's very important to move on. And there will be a lot of feedback from all the sides all the time in our life.
No doubt. I mean, I wasn't even expecting us to go here, but this is kind of why I asked that question initially. Before we even talk about AI, anything, like what even is education? Because all of these things we're discussing is related to that really fundamental question. Like, what does it mean to become an educated person? So yeah, I'm glad that we touched on that, and especially this thing you mentioned about the student-teacher relationship, because as we will discuss soon, I'm sure with LLMs and chatbots, that relationship itself is being, I don't want to say subverted, but like rather it's been affected in a very radical way. Wonderful. What I was also, so again, I got a bit excited before I got carried away, but I was going to say this study, the reason I want to start here is because I kind of want the listener to understand that, like, in your case, you aren't just like, I don't know, some random person with opinions. You actually looked into the literature and taken some time to think about this. And I'm the kind of person that respect people who spend time with the subject for a long time, for a while, and I respect their opinions over some random podcaster like myself on the internet. So and that's why, in particular, to discuss this topic of AI and education, I want to talk to you over, like, I don't know, some tech CEO with like a little AI startup, because obviously the incentives are a bit different there, right? As you might guess. So firstly, before I ask the question, yeah, of course, but I mean that sincerely and genuinely. But before I ask the question about the broad question, can you just talk about this recent literature review that you did with a bunch of peers? I'm not going to name all of them. There were like, I think, 7 or 8 people here, but I'm just going to read it out. So it was Artificial Intelligence in Classroom Management, a systematic review on educational purposes, technical implementations, and ethical considerations. So I tried to read as much of this as I can. It's a bit of a long review, so not as diligent as I wanted to. But at a high level, can you tell us what was the intent behind starting this review? But then also, especially in the discussion section, what were some interesting things that you guys found? I promise this will be the only interruption. In the past few years, I truly have cherished connecting with all you listeners of this podcast, whether through email, video calls, or simply the comments. And I'd hate to lose this fledgling community we've built around our shared love for philosophy and science. And so I'm kindly asking you to consider subscribing to this podcast on Substack. Let's cut the BS. In our techno-feudalist times, no platform is perfect, and at the end of the day, these companies own us. However, if I may naively be hopeful, Substack at least allows me to export email addresses for me to keep connected with you all if one of these platforms decides to kick me off for some reason, which, as we're well aware, they've done in the past with no explanation. In fact, this almost happened to me recently. So please, let's stay connected through Substack, and if all else fails, at least the good old SMT protocol. That is a nerdy joke for you programmers out there.
Thank you. So that was with my colleagues from the Hector's Research Institute on Educational Sciences in Tübingen, University of Tübingen. And that research started, and they are doing wonderful research on the use of AI in education, but also other technologies in education. And even before the ChatGPT boom, this was done, or I mean, generative AI expansion. And the idea there was to see, well, was twofold, but I mean, I will talk about my contribution to that. I mean, they of course reviewed the literature, but the idea was to see how the current research on the use of technology or advanced digital tools in education is being done. That was one aspect. Another aspect that I looked at was also kind of to give some ethical recommendations how this should all be implemented. But an interesting component there is that, in my opinion, again, so it's open for debate. You can see the numbers and then you can judge for yourself. Not sufficient number of people actually are aware of the ethical considerations when they do this type of research. And that is something, so that doesn't mean that this type of research is unethical, by far not. It's just that they're not explicitly mentioning this in their manuscripts. And that was one of the aspects that was checked, right? So through a significant corpus of papers, we checked how many times ethical components were mentioned and the data sensitivity was mentioned. And even just for this research, those topics are very important because especially if you're talking about minors, there are quite some questions about the implementation of AI tools and of the privacy of minors. And those are all research papers, which are, again, is for sure better, well, not for sure, but likely better than something which some commercial company is doing.
I think it's, I'm just to interrupt, I think just to clarify, can you explain, because what you did in your case with your peers was what you would call, I think, a meta-analysis, right? You would look at some other research papers. So just explain that bit and as to where the lack of concern for like the ethics come in.
Yeah. Okay. That indeed. Thank you, Rahul, for resetting me to that. That's very important way of how science works. So we can do, that's why it's called a review paper or this kind of meta-analysis. So we'll look at a large set of published papers on a certain topics, and then we compare them by certain parameters. And that helps us. So sometimes these studies do replication. In this case, we analyzed certain parameters to see the trends in this type of research and to see whether it is responsible enough. That was at least the part where I was involved in. I mean, there were also other interesting components to see which type of technologies are used and so on. But I'm talking about the ethical aspects. And then I was interested in checking, right? So how sensitive these researchers were to ethical questions, how often they mention word ethics, do they have ethical permits, do they mention them, do they mention data privacy, do they have some data plan, how this is tackled. It might still exist even if it's not explicitly mentioned, right? But we are just checking kind of what's happening in the field modulo these parameters. And then afterwards, we are trying to give some recommendations, okay, what should be done? And there, it's not only, the recommendations are not only about how this type of research should be done responsibly, but also how these type of these types of technologies should be applied responsibly. That was the goal. And I was not thrilled, and we were not thrilled by the awareness or at least explicit mentioning of ethical concerns and data privacy concerns. And I want to say that still academic institutions and any implementation of technologies in the academic setting is likely more sensitive to ethical concerns than something which is done in industry. And why do I think so? Is because, so that is not certain that it's like that, right? But the incentives from academia are not commercial, which makes them less susceptible to this challenge. Of course, also some commercial softwares can be great, but we also have examples of some commercial softwares that are used in education, which are clearly meant to increase the user's engagement and are not, and even for some advertisements and so on, and are not really focused on the education, and also are collecting the data, and we don't know what's happening with the data and how this is all controlled. And we are still very happy to give away our permits for the data used to these apps. But then when it comes to completing a survey or participate in some academic research, then we are like, oh, but now there is this question of data privacy. So those are all, interesting questions. But what they are the main ethical challenges within this framework are some of this, are we sure that this type of technology is really beneficial for the learner? So do we really need it? What is the benefit of it? If we have the understanding that there is a benefit, then it makes sense to first do the research. If we do the research, then we can responsibly implement it. And we shouldn't just implement something without any research, or at least not widely. Then we have these aspects, is this algorithm used fair? Is it discriminating or it's not discriminating? Is it transparent enough what's going on in the model? So those are some of these very basic questions which come with the use of AI in education.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, I just want to say regarding the kind of the privacy concern and the AI ethics concerns, like it's impossible to have this discussion about AI in education without making it political. So for the listener, if you haven't already, I recommend the book, The Empire of AI, by the journalist Karen Howe. It's a long 700-page book, but just read the first few chapters. Frankly, I mean, as much as I love deep learning and it's my world, but these tech companies, they kind of run like little mafias right now. And I think that book by Karen Howe just systematically outlines all of it. I mean, AI ethics is probably going to be the last of their concerns. And on top of that, I would say there's also like this, Slavoj Žižek actually in fact makes this point. He has this idea that where like sometimes corporations, they do this thing where they talk about something so much to the point where they just simply do the talking to cover up everything else they're doing. So for example, they would have an AI ethics officer, an AI ethics team, and then they would have a climate team, climate officer, DEI team, DEI officer. And then all they do is they constantly talk about these things. And they're like, we're going to have discussions about discussions. But then that's a way for them to excuse themselves, to repudiate the responsibility of actually doing something, of actually taking action that does protect people's privacy, that does protect people's data. And so I find that prevalent in a lot of the tech world because I'm a part of it and I see it. Ergo, why I said that it becomes political, where frankly, as the godfather of deep learning, Jeffrey Hinton, says, we have no choice but to regulate these companies. But anyway, that's a whole other can of worms that I don't want to open here. But I don't know if you got any thoughts on what I just said, Vlasta.
It is so I have a lot of thoughts on it.
Please go ahead.
To keep it more up to the point. So just think about profiling of children and having a lot of data on children, and and claiming, this data will predict their future behavior, or this data predicts their academic success, or this data will predict their success in the later in their business world. Or we have a lot of this sensitive data which are then helping us to sell them stuff. That is already problematic, but I mean it can also get worse than that. And these are these famous examples. I don't want to bring them because they're too dark, but you will. So just by the fact of being able to profile someone's origin, in the case, just because that's written at the moment that is not being abused. But we can imagine it very quickly being abused if the political climate changes. And again, there are even some examples. And again, I don't want to go into this. It gets very quickly very dark, but just by the fact that this exists and that it can locate people using these means is a potential threat. And it can be really an existential threat.
I completely agree, and it's quite bleak. I mean, in fact, I don't even think we're going there. A part of me, and perhaps I'm being too cynical here, we're already here. I mean, look at companies like Palantir. I'm going to say it. I mean, this is the podcast. I can say it. I don't care. The Palantir and all these big tech companies, as you say, profiling people. And here, another paper which I know you've read is Mel Andrews wrote this paper called "Machine Learning Has a Pseudoscience Problem." And one point they make is that there's in fact this resurgence of like social Darwinism and like a weird form of even like race science in like the machine learning community because of these things, like, as you say, you can predict people's future based on their origin or the language they speak and all these things. And this can lead to some really dark places, and probably where this normative questions come in when it comes to like AI ethics and all of that.
Yeah, because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, it has the danger of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
And I mean, this other aspect, which you said, kind of that these different types of washing, ethical washing, and pretending to have.
That's the term, ethical washing. Yeah, that's it. This is the word I was looking for. I think people should look up what ethical washing means. In fact, do you mind explaining what that term means, please?
I mean, yeah, to just to pretend that something is done in an ethical way, even though it's not, or to just discuss certain aspects and then, the example that you were just giving. So we are discussing certain things, but we are actually not making real changes, or we are making some cosmetic changes, but we are not making the fundamental changes in what's ethically done. And I think that the third aspect, which is done, and I think you also mentioned it, is this deflecting. So saying, yeah, sure, there are these ethical concerns, but we have to win the race against the other nations, or we have to win the race because it is so powerful and it will bring so many advantages that we should just not care about the ethical questions there. And that does happen, and that is a big discussion, kind of who will win the AI race. But as a response to that, we recently actually had some discussion in the Netherlands about this. And the discussion and what I liked was one of the colleagues saying, no, we want the AI mirroring our values. and okay, it was said European values, but in any case, we wanted to mirror our values, even if the race is maybe not won, but what is being done is aligned with our values. And I find it very important. And some other people really think it's really important to win the race.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like the nuclear arms race in the 20th century. We're having our own kind of really pathetic variant of it like losers like Sam Altman. Anyway, I know I'm insulting people, but leave that aside. All right, so kind of back to the topic of, but before we get to this again, the education bit, is there anything you want to comment on regarding what we just discussed regarding the study, or more of do you feel like you touched on the important points?
Yes, and I'm very grateful for you for hinting me when I kind of have to explain it in less abstract but more concrete terms. That's very helpful.
Yeah, because I think what I wanted to clarify was to the listener, it's like, it's not that you and your team or your peers did like one study when they like had like a group of people and studied them, but rather it was a literature review or like a meta-analysis. So it's a more broad, high-level view. And I've found personally, again, as someone that's new to this kind of academic world, those kind of studies are super useful because you get a broad picture of like the literature on a certain topic. So just wanted to clarify that.
But I also think it's super useful to have someone like you who by now has a significant experience in science communication, and then to help us to communicate better.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you very much. Now I'm blushing. But anyway, so all right. So this question so I kind of posed the question as if it was kind of like a moral panic. This idea of, is AI a threat to education? The reason I'm saying that is because whenever I talk to the regular person, and what I mean by that is a person who's necessarily not in this world of, fully immersed in the AI world of like either AI ethics or as an AI engineer or researcher. One of my best friends, she's a teacher, and she mentions this too. How much like ChatGPT and all these LLMs are affecting students. So I don't know if you know this, like in Australia, for instance, now we have a ban on social media for those under 16 years. It was one of the first of its kind, and then New Zealand followed, and a few other countries are following. So similar to how like smoking was treated in the 20th century, I feel like social media is being treated like that. But then at the same time, though, now they have these education chatbots. So not ChatGPT, not like a general purpose chatbot, but specific chatbots made for education being used in some schools. Like I saw even in some school in New South Wales, some high school was using like chatbots to help students. And again, I'm deeply skeptical about these things, even though I myself very much use Claude Code and all these things. So I want to ask, like, I'm not even sure how to ask this question, but where do you, the current contemporary AI, Vlasta, do you think there's more good than bad, or do you think it's a threat? Do you think AI, the same way that social media was banned in schools, should be banned in schools too? So at a high level, where do you see the current climate of AI in education?
Yeah, I think the AI can be used in education in a responsible way. I also think that we have to, so that some of these discussions should shift a bit. So they should shift to the question of how, not whether, and
Right.
to really see, okay, how can we maximize the gain? How this can be done? How do we communicate to our students who are using it even when we don't allow it officially? How do we
Just all of them?
communicate to our... Sorry?
Which is all of them. Everyone's using it. So, yeah.
I mean, also professors are using it, and that is then this interesting question of kind of what is then the university if they are submitting, like the South Park scenario, students are submitting essays written by generative AI, and then professors are grading essays with generative AI, and then where is their education?
Wow. Yeah.
And there are even articles about this that students noticed that professors use the AI tools to grade, and in some universities this was even permitted, and then they complain about this, and then they complain this is not what I'm paying for. So this is a bit kind of this consumer approach. But then it's this other question. Okay, how should we assess? Should we shift the way we assess? And all of this has to shift somehow dynamically. So the questions for me are much more in what to do in the present situation, because it's not that we can just close our eyes and everything will, we say it's forbidden, and then if it's forbidden, no one will do it.
Looks like that.
Yeah, but regarding the social media ban, I find it very interesting, and I would be also interested to hear more about it and to understand more about it, because what I saw that, for instance, UNESCO is saying that it's important also to hear the perspective of young people, and then there is also a big question. Okay, is it the point of banning it or teaching them how to self-regulate? And then which age is the cut? Is 16 the cut or earlier age? And then what actually counts as social media? Because I read somewhere that there is a discussion that YouTube counts as social media, but you don't need a YouTube account to access YouTube. So maybe only to upload, and then that maybe it's dangerous kind of to upload your content, because then you can have a lot of hateful comments. So it's not clear to me what exactly is behind the idea behind it. And then I also read something which I found even more disturbing, and this is that the mentioning, and again, I don't know whether that's really happening, of softwares which do the facial scan to recognize someone's age. That I found like
yes,
not very helpful.
That does, yeah. The thing though is, I mean, this is where again the media, the way they spin it is interesting. That was already there. Like, I think the whole facial recognition with like the iPhone was there since like probably the iPhone 15 or 16. So it wasn't like a new thing. But then
I don't use it.
This is where it gets interesting. Where like, okay, the technology is there and it already exists for a while, but then because the media made it like this scary story that it's gonna, make it seem as if they're gonna, I don't know, seal your facial data or whatever, it gets a bit hairy. So I don't know. And again, I too, like yourself, am ambivalent to whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm erring more on I'm pro the ban only because when I think of like, I don't know, what's like Instagram or TikTok, it's just crap. It's not, there's nothing of use in any way that can, help someone, have a better quality of life in any way. But then of course, things like YouTube or even other platforms, which probably could have potential to, for example, I watch heaps of lectures online on like math or machine learning, and if let's say I was a kid and I couldn't access all of those lectures, so I would miss out on the opportunity to educate myself on those things. But yeah, so it's a very difficult thing to even analyze, but also like how practically the ban is implemented, as you pointed out. It's not like a either or, like a binary kind of answer there.
But definitely, so it's an interesting, social experiment that we will learn more about. I find it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I find it. I find it very important, and maybe that's something we don't do enough. Well, we at our university teach a course called Behavioral Change Technologies, which is raising awareness of students to technologies that are intended to change people's behavior. And that can be already just the hostile architecture, which makes kind of benches kind of only possible to lean a bit on them, but not that one is not able to sleep on them. So already something so simple can be a behavioral change technology, but of course also some more advanced technologies and apps and so on, which have this as an intention. So some Instagram advertising algorithms and so on. And I think that's kind of, so what I think it's important is that maybe even earlier raise awareness of people, of young students, of how these softwares operate, what is the intention behind them, so that they can understand that better. Then that they can understand that some of these peer comparisons on Instagram can become toxic. And also to understand how this comment culture, that's something you mentioned in the beginning of this interview, that people who comment on the YouTube content often, not always of course, but often have some polarizing opinion or and that motivates them to write down that. And if a young person is, I mean, we had this in my home country, this example that one young YouTuber committed, suicide because of the most likely online bullying. It's
oh yeah,
still
it's
under
terrible. Yeah, it's sad.
Yes, of course, but there I think it's the kind of raising awareness on both sides. First, not to do that, but also to understand that it's not personal, and which is hard. But at least to raise this awareness of how that all functions. I think that could be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, they call this like a parasocial relationship, right? So the idea is
because it's not like we do have a lot of bans also in terms of kind of that alcohol cannot be sold to minors, or I think in different countries the different age, different number is there and so on. But I think it's also important to understand how dangerous alcoholism is also to adults and to everyone.
Correct. Yeah,
and this type of communication and ability to self-regulate is something very, very valuable. So even with the ban, this discussion and this type of, I guess that might also belong to these digital literacy programs that we should develop, also to teach about such dangers, because for us might be intuitive, but it's certainly not intuitive for everyone, especially not from the early age.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned digital literacy, but of course, the other thing probably that's perhaps more important at our time is AI literacy, right? Like, I mean, that's probably going to be the next part of this discussion. So tell us more, Vlasta. Like, firstly, again, this whole idea of introducing, in your view, what do you think as a philosopher? What kind of critical lens do you take this notion of introducing chatbots and LLMs into classrooms from middle and high school to even obviously universities? And then secondly, can you just maybe tell us about this topic of AI literacy? What does that practically entail?
Mm-hmm. What I advocate there is to teach,
from your point of view,
is to teach and that's what I will be teaching, and I was already shortly teaching, intellectual virtues with relation to AI, to be to develop the intellectual critical abilities related to AI. I believe that is also helpful for our lifelong learning goals. And as an example, so we know that algorithms can be biased. I give to my students some drawings, which are biased drawings, and even though the prompting was not biased, that they notice how the algorithm, like very graphically, how the algorithm creates biased output. Of course, we can also use other famous examples from the literature of algorithmic bias, and then teach them, okay, but you need to develop intellectual justice as a skill and to override what the algorithm is telling. And the algorithm, the output given by the algorithm can be very seductive. It's also easy to outsource thinking, deciding, and so on to an algorithm, but it's our responsibility, both our ethical but also epistemic, so our intellectual responsibility is to check what the algorithm is giving us. And then if we want, then there is a question of what is an author, but if we want to sign something that is given by algorithm, or for what we use the algorithm, we have to check it, we have to stand behind it. And in many professions, different AI tools will be used, also in medical profession and so on. But that's why they say that this story about the human in control, because human has to also feel empowered to go against the recommendation of the machine, which is hard. Then another question is we have to teach them how this whole system operates, how we can use it in a beneficial way. Now the discussion is, okay, how do we prompt in a good way? But that will probably not be the discussion forever. And that's what I mean by this lifelong learning tendency. These softwares will change. And most likely, we will have a generative AI which is trained to respond as Professor Sikimic to certain questions given by students, because AI will be trained on my texts. And I already read that some professors train algorithms on the feedback that they were giving to students before on large sets. And then students ask new questions, they can get a very similar response, which might be fine, right? I think I am not. Yes, so I noticed that maybe you have a more critical view on that. I think that is okay, as long as there is the awareness that this is not the absolute truth. It happens that students, I heard it as an anecdote, but that students came to one professor and said, no, what you wrote on the blackboard is wrong, the AI is saying something else.
Yeah, I mean, but this is kind of what I mean. Like, so I'm so glad you mentioned intellectual virtues, because another paper, I didn't read the whole thing, but is this one I was reading yesterday, which was, it's not a paper, it's a chapter, a book chapter. It's From Data to Theory and Back, Why the AI Era Requires Philosophy. So, okay, this is kind of what I want to perhaps propose to you, right? So I've been thinking about this idea. Yeah, for sure, we can, we can have like frameworks or different like mental heuristics and all these things that we, put on in our lives, or like take upon in our lives, to try and develop AI literacy. However, here's where I probably defend more of like phenomenology of like what is our lived experience with AI. And the thing is, even if we rationally know that a chatbot is just a statistical algorithm, that it has no agency, or then the question is, what's agency? There are all these the meta questions, but let's bracket them for a moment. However, in a way, we can't help as we interact with these technologies in a way to treat them like we anthropomorphize them, right? And even if we rationally know that this is just a LLM, this is just a massive large language model, nonetheless, there's, as you rightly point out, the students like, oh no, the professor is wrong because my chatbot said otherwise. And then also there was a paper that came out of OpenAI, in fact, that there's mathematical proof that LLMs do hallucinate, as in it's because of one of the algorithms, how the bias runs in training the neural networks, that you can't stop hallucination in a way. So there are all of these things that we're learning more about these strange new technologies. But even if you rationally know all of these things, when we interact with them, it's a different story. And that's why I am, again, maybe I sound like a curmudgeon here, but when we introduce these things into the environment, and this is really important, of learning, which isn't the same as the environment of like business or something else, I don't know, it's something that requires, in this case, yes, philosophy, because to question what it even means to learn, like what's the kind of the lived experience of a student and a teacher, as opposed to the lived experience of a person who is working at a corporation or like some kind of manager at a company. So that's kind of where I guess my more critical lens comes in when we discuss like introducing AI into a classroom or into a lecture hall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're touching there two questions. One question is, which I advertise for, is this, that because the students will use AI in their job most likely one day, not all of them, but anyway, a lot of people will use it. Then how to use it in a good way, how to train them to use it in a good way. And that's one question. And the second question is, which advanced digital tools or AI tools, because it's not just generative AI, should be used in education, and in which way? And then we can have this very specific debate of how much LLMs, as they are at the moment, should be used. And but I mean, for generating pictures, also different types of algorithms are used and so on. So a lot of AI is being used and people are not even aware of it. I think this critical thinking is key for the fact of later use of AI in one's life. I also think that developing, so for this, yeah, hopefully, it's a hope, as a response to the phenomenological objection, is that if we are really developing certain virtues, they should help us really respond. So become our second nature, right? If that is possible, that we don't know whether it really empirically works like that.
Aristotle's idea is of virtues like a live, almost like a habit, right? So in a way, I guess,
exactly.
Would you say you're an Aristotelian, or like how do you conceptualize
I think that's
virtue?
an empirical question which we will learn, and we will get an answer to it.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, that's true.
So I think it's a very appealing idea. Whether it really works like that, it's not completely clear. In positive psychology, this is also being explored, and philosophers and psychologists are collaborating together to see how that works. So how stable that type of is it just an attitude, or is it a real trait? So how stable that type of educational intervention is. And then I completely agree that there is something special in the human to human interaction, which current LLMs cannot and should not take over, and also certain skills which we are learning from human to human interaction, which again cannot be replaced and shouldn't be replaced. And I think that's something which you also argue for, because we exchanged some notes before. this interview. And this is this that also the why we go, why are we learning? Because we want to experience the learning process ourselves, and we don't want to delegate everything. It's not that I want to watch someone how this person swims. I actually want to get in the water and swim myself. So it's not that I just want that LLM writes for me. I actually want to write myself, because that's the way how I express myself. Of course, if it helps me to write in a more expressive way and so on, sure, great, it's a great tool, but I might, because photography exists and videos exist, we still like to paint by our hand, and we still enjoy this type of art. So I think that is kind of, okay, what I want to expose myself without the aid of machine, and what I want to learn for myself, and why is this critically important. So those are very important questions and deep questions which will be addressed. And I think there will be a lot of pushback from all sides, both from the people who want to experience things themselves and think this is invaluable to learn and to do something by ourselves, and from the other camp saying, okay, no, we should just embrace this technology and be far more productive, if we are far more productive.
Yeah, that's another whole other discussion. I want to touch on one other insight from that meta-analysis, but before we get to that, this term that I've been using, it came to me when I was doing a live stream with another friend of mine, was this notion that I feel like modern society, we want to relinquish what I would call hermeneutic labor. Sorry, sounds wanky, but what I mean by that is there's this idea that, and this, I can point here to the MIT study of like cognitive offloading, where we wanna offload this difficult work of interpreting, thinking, of trying to, when we have some kind of a phenomena, anything empirical or something we read, instead of trying to sit with the unknowing or the discomfort of like a new idea, it's much easier to outsource it to the AI, right? The AI overloads. And so the reason I approach, when it comes to education specifically, the reason I say that there's this relinquishing hermeneutic labor it's for me to our own detriment, is because I do believe, and I say this as a student, whenever I learn something new, okay, let's say I'm learning about eigenvectors in linear algebra. I could easily tell ChatGPT to just explain to me what eigenvectors are, and then give me a few examples, and I'll read the summaries. Okay, I know what eigenvectors are, they scale, whatever. But I think when it comes to learning specifically, the resistance, the difficulty of learning, the almost like that like when you feel like you don't know something and you got to push through, that makes you a better thinker. That makes one a better, more logical, analytic thinker. And sort of offloading the difficulty of learning, the difficulty of having to push through, to a LLM, in my view, is to our own detriment, because then what happens is essentially we become intellectually lazy, and we lose out even the ability to sit with discomfort, the discomfort of thought for a long period of time. So I'm curious, my little rant, again, my fourth or fifth rant now, what your thoughts on that little idea is, that where, in fact, in learning, resistance is the good thing.
I agree, but I also think, I want to add some interesting food for thought, and this is, we can still make also difficult educational content more interesting and more approachable.
And if you could elaborate on that, interesting.
Yes, and we notice this over the long periods of how education shifts. But we can. It's this basic example, like a teacher complains to parents, they are not working, they are not studying. That is in high school. It actually happened, and the teacher is saying they are not doing much in math and complains. And then one parent gets up and says, "Okay, but what did you do to motivate them?" and that's why it's a dynamic process, and it goes two ways. And it is a bit, okay, how do you motivate? students, but it's also how are we learning ourselves. And it can be something very simple, right? So some people are more visual learners.
Yeah,
others
like myself,
yeah, others prefer the audio. For the visual, which type of visuals are we making? Are we making some of these trees, maps, which are helping us? How do we practice our retention? So in our memory, are we, I don't know, doing this kind of, again, I like to draw, I like to write some maps, I like to use colors. I have even a board in my room. I hope to soon paint the whole wall in this color so that I can just draw on it, because that's something that I enjoy. So are we really, some people like to do it alone with high concentration. That's what I like. But other people really enjoy to do it in a group. And then they brainstorm together and try to learn together and to figure something together, like some task in logic, which is, a mathematical task. So there can be ways to make this more fun and more engaging. Of course, that in the world where everything is adjusted for this kind of short type of attention, that is a problem, and we then have to put some emphasis on being less superficial and on focusing on something deeper and expanding our attention span. But so if we are aware that we should do that and we do some small steps towards it, it also helps. Are we having a habit of reading a book? Sure, even before we could read Wikipedia summaries of certain books, but we still this is this question. So do we like to watch someone swimming, or we want to experience swimming ourselves? So do we want to read a book ourselves? Do we want to go through this experience ourselves? Now software can really help with automated translation, but do we still want to learn a foreign language and to understand the foreign culture? So those are the questions that are in front of us. And it's, again, if we are just focused on the outcome, profit outcome, then I'm not sure what the answer is. But if we are focused more on this idea of what is a meaningful and purposeful life, then I hope that our answer will be, okay, we want to increase in depth, but we also are ready to innovate. So if these AI tools are making it more fun for us, why not? Let's use them. If the VR is making it more fun for us to learn, sure, maybe it's helpful. Maybe it's not. Maybe it just increases and that is also a big discussion. Is this now actually easier, or it requires even more time and resources from the teachers and so on? So those are all, it's not clear, and it depends on the technology. And then there is also a question of whether this educational technology has a good design or not. And that's partially touches something that you mentioned, and it was about that we discuss with the chatbots often, at least the commercial generative AI, as in an anthropomorphic way, that we think that's another person. But I mean, the AI is designed in that way that it wants us to speak with it as long as possible, and that it's appealing to us and presents itself as a human, because that again increases the engagement, and it seems that the intention behind it is just to spend more and more time and feed it with more and more information and so on, and potentially pay for the paid version to spend even more time.
Indeed, and I'm sure people have seen examples of that. I mean, I don't know if people recall, but I used ChatGPT when it came out initially, I think GPT-3 or something. And when you asked it a question, it was like a Q&A engine. It gives you an answer. But now the contemporary GPT-5, but even before that, you ask ChatGPT a question, it'll answer the question and say whatever. And then after that, be like, do you want me to do this? It'll ask you a question back. So it wants you to constantly engage with it. And then in a way, that's fine too. Sometimes, for example, I've been learning a lot of information theory because I'm obsessed with this active inference stuff. Anyway, and I haven't really got a background in mathematics, some of this abstract math. I would ask ChatGPT to give me a concrete example of how a certain mathematical object or mathematical formula is used in a specific field like machine learning. And it would actually give a really good example. Like, it would give a really useful, concrete example. And then using that concrete example, I can get this abstract idea. But then after, it sometimes would ask me like a nonsense question. Do you want me to like apply this in that arena in neuroscience? I'm like, no, I just wanted this thing. And so I think it's a part of this is kind of like what you mentioned, like developing that virtue or like that the discipline to know when to stop in a way, to like not completely get lost in chatting with a chatbot, but rather understand the task at hand. Our attention should be to this other more important thing we're doing. So that's kind of what I kind of feel like is interesting about what you mentioned about even the product design aspect of things.
Exactly, because that's a bad design. That's a design which wants to stimulate addiction, which wants to... Sorry?
And like hook you and completely grab you into interacting
and has some of these freemium features, ones that you also pay to spend more time. And that we also see with Duolingo. I know that a lot of people enjoy Duolingo, even in my family, but it has a very much this type of design. So it sends you push-in notification. And that's not a design which we would want from some software which is developed for the purpose of a school. There we want much more care, and that it's not done in that way. So there we expect a better design, and people do that. The problem there is also it has to be updated and maintained, and none of these things are cheap. So they all require investing. Of course, also traditional books are expensive, so that's fine, but it requires also monitoring, updating, and those are the challenges in front of those softwares. But I would still trust more something developed by educational researchers for the purpose of a school, and I would hope that they consider the ethical questions and the data privacy questions, which are also part of the ethical questions and so on, and that this is developed also in a more designed also in a more responsible way, and that it really has the goal of maximizing the knowledge and not maximizing the engagement. So,
the question, I think behavioral science and product design, it's becoming such a crucial part of modern existence. And I think sort of like what you mentioned about like AI literacy, or like, sorry, you mentioned that at your university, you guys have this specific course you'll do, behavioral change technology. I mean, that kind of education, it seems to me, should be like as fundamental as like math and science and language.
Well, I think my colleague who teaches that, Lily Frank, would be very happy to hear that. I will tell her.
I'll probably reach out to the colleague and you're probably trying to get them on the podcast, because that's fascinating. And also I should just say this, like in tech companies, product designers are paid more than engineers, and in a way they should be, because product design is 95% of the thing, right? I mean, they work a lot with engineers for sure, and like I think it's a good thing that they're paid more than engineers. However, the problem is, nothing against, I love the product designers at my company, they really love the people, but what are they designing the product for? That's the question. Like, you can design the product, but what's the end they're trying to achieve through that design?
And that's this in the paper that you mentioned about the theory and data relationship. That's the role of the theory.
The normative.
I mean, the theory can, and people don't, people undermine that when they are kind of saying, okay, philosophy is useless. No, philosophy is everywhere. Philosophy of a company is there. Also, this capitalistic philosophy is a philosophy.
Oh, no doubt.
And these people who decide what the product should achieve, that is also, they are really focused then maybe on profit, but they can also be focused on altruistic goals also in a private company. There is no reason that stops that, right? So it's, what is their focus? What is the philosophy? What is the theory behind? And then, of course, the rest of the team will follow it. But if they have certain value, vision, mission, that's all, those are the corporate terms, but that's actually a philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, I should mention, Vlasta, I mean, this is why it's impossible to have this conversation without getting political, but the idea of like that everything is a philosophy, or that even these companies are a philosophy. There's a book by this Italian economist called Clara Mattei. She wrote a book called The Capital Order, how economists invented austerity and paved the way to fascism. And her whole amazing book, I mean, just a brilliant, brilliant thinker. And her thesis is that there's this idea, right, in our ideologies, laissez-faire capitalism is, oh, let the free market do its thing, no ideologies, no intervention from the government, let it just let free agents just trade, and we'll have this utopian society. But her whole point is, and she documents this historically from even before the Cold War, even during World War II, how like in Italian Mussolini and fascism started, all of that, is that in fact, on the contrary, capitalism is full of ideology, as in the government is constantly intervening in the markets and the state is constantly trying to serve these corporations, as we currently see more explicitly in how like you see all these tech CEOs all goody with Trump in the US. So it's like, it's to say that they don't have a philosophy is nonsensical, because in a way their philosophy is in their actions.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that book is really important, because I feel like, again, we all have these like dichotomies, these ideas that like, oh, free markets, capitalism versus, I don't know, socialism and no state intervention. But I find that these things are just too simplistic. And
Yes,
I would
but
certainly connect this to the AI debate too.
Well, also developing your own agenda as an antagonism to another one, that is a pretty strong point of view. And there were a lot of actions to silence and to stop all over
course.
the world.
Yeah,
The alternative way of thinking. And that for sure, I mean, this competitiveness and this antagonistic way of thinking instead of some more holistic way of thinking, instead of some idea that we should all together, that science and education should better the life of all of us. I mean, that for sure. Yeah, science did develop a lot also through the competition in that period. That is a fact, but that's not necessarily a value which we might want for our future. And we should keep at least the possibility that, I mean, we should empower ourselves and keep in mind that we can change so many things if a lot of us think the same way. And we should kind of, try to keep this empowerment in us and not just delegate it, neither to a machine, but nor to some other paradigm which is currently prevailing.
Some elite or some corporation
Exactly.
or something, of course.
Exactly. Yeah. And I do believe that universities historically had this disruptive
Oh, of course.
role.
This is, empirically true. A lot of the big protests, started off in the civil rights movement to the against the Vietnam War. A bunch of these movements started off at universities.
It's also in Europe.
That's certainly a point. And I should just also say for the listeners regarding this idea of kind of the political aspects of capitalism and innovation, we did discuss this on a previous episode with Vlasta. It was called "Does Capitalism Cause Innovation?" or "Does Capitalism Give Way to Innovation?" Another like a prevalent ideology where all the innovation is like in private companies, and then everything else is like just nothing happens there. Again, these are these ideologies that need to be challenged critically. Wonderful. Vlasta, I have two more questions. One, back to the study, the review you guys did, and the last one, a bit more imaginative kind of question, just to end on a fun note. Is it okay to go for another, I would say, 10 minutes? I said 10 before, and now, okay, I got a thumbs up. Great. So one part that spoke to me in this study was, it's in the highlights, in fact. It says here, only 16% of studies used AI beyond efficiency. For example, real-time feedback. And I think, in a way, I was both surprised, but also kind of glad to hear this, to read this. The reason is, I don't see a problem in using AI for things like, like admin work, just like, I don't know, attendance stuff, whatever, teachers, all the stuff that necessarily isn't in a part of the teaching per se. So can you tell a bit more about is it the case that even right now, with the introduction of like chatbots and all of this, AI is mostly being used in education for like admin work or like efficiency improving kind of tasks, or did I read that statistic wrong from what you guys did then?
Yeah, so the study was done before the Gen AI expansion.
2022, right? That was the last.
Exactly. So that is something to keep in mind. But when it comes to now, I mean, more thought-provoking and discussions that are now done about the generative AI, which might be interesting for the listeners. It's not only the admin work, it's often also consulting AI about generating the curricula, which then comes again, okay, how are we keeping our educational freedom if we're doing that? Maybe it's helpful to get some ideas from AI, but should we? I heard of people, educational experts, who designed workshops just using AI. Well, not just, but definitely using the help of AI. So AI can be used there. Generative AI can be used for that. And for some basic stuff, it does some type of job. I don't think it's bad to consult it. I just think we have to keep our autonomy on top of it, our intellectual autonomy. So that's one aspect. Then, of course, whether or not it can or should not be used for grading. Of course, the strong thing is about giving feedback. And then there are different AI tools measuring attention. That was also done before the Gen AI expansion. And there, with this measuring attention, I find it interesting and questionable how much we want that. But the idea is also that we can have interactive textbooks, which will, for instance, notice, I don't know, I as a Slavic speaker don't use articles in English. Then I get more exercises with articles so that I can improve them, and that I get kind of this individualized approach, which my teacher might not be able to give to me because the teacher might not have enough time for me. On the other hand, the question is, monitoring the use of all these technologies might also require from teacher a lot of time. So is this really saving so much time? I am not sure. Those are all empirical questions, but educational experts are actually exploring all these things, and I think we should trust them once they establish certain degrees of certainty, right? So once the studies show certain degrees of certainty, but it is because there is so much irresponsible use of different types of AI in education, then there is a strong skepticism also for the studies and tools which are done in a more responsible way. So I think we have to, keep there this intellectual openness and adopt what passed certain quality control, and again also be critical to the stuff which didn't. And there we have this kind of type, well, it's called privacy paradox, but I see it also trust paradox, or I don't know. So like people are much more open to use and to give consent for their data use for an app such as Duolingo, but are then much more skeptical when they come at the university and say, okay, we now want to explore this software in a much more responsible way, hopefully, right? Because hopefully it passed certain university boards and so on, and it's constructed differently. It might not be perfect in the beginning, but yes, those are some aspects. I think it's interesting times, and I would hope that some of these tools will really make the education more engaging, more interesting, and maybe also help us quicker get answers to some questions which we otherwise would really have to spend a long time to find, and to also, I found it helpful, even I asked for some explanations, the generative AI models, and it gives nice explanations. It's very quick, but I don't think that this is the reason enough for people which are now bringing this thesis that the standard education becomes obsolete because of it. No, definitely that it doesn't become obsolete just because generative AI can give very good explanations. we should embrace it. Why not? We can get some good explanations from it, but let's keep in mind this critical aspect. And I think for parents, it's also very important to then talk to their children and to explain. Of course, it's also part of the responsibility of the school and teachers. And I hope many of our listeners will also have some role of an educator, either in a company or in a school system. And then there, of course, always to communicate both the downsides and the good sides, and to try to find the golden middle. That is this virtual approach that, again, I am keen on.
So I should have noticed that this study was done prior to Gen AI. And I'm curious,
Yes.
like, are there any in your work, are there any work in the pipeline specifically kind of analyzing Gen AI in education?
Yes, from the philosophical aspect. So
Yes.
Yeah, so this meta study was done on the data from before, which I still find very illustrative and very important, because we are seeing, again, all these ethical questions and so forth. When it comes to the Gen AI, I published with my colleague Aleksandra Vučković a paper on the epistemic justice and the general justice in the context of education, in the context of AI in education. And there, in the first part of the paper, we actually discussed this: what is the purpose of education, and why we want global epistemic justice in education in the first place. So why do we want the maximum possible knowledge in the whole world accessible to everyone if possible? And then we discuss it, okay, how AI might hinder that, and how relying on AI might also diminish some autochthon knowledge, and that we have to be aware of the dominant data sets, and they can come from different parts of the world. They just come from where the most data is available. That is not even connected to the wealth, but it's really just connected to the amount of data. And then, but then some underprivileged groups or minority groups will not be equally represented. Their knowledge might not be shared. Whether these softwares are developed, and if the softwares are helpful, which they most likely are, we have evidence that some softwares are very helpful. Are they really accessible to everyone? Are these softwares functioning? I mean, they're not functioning alone, so they function together with hardware. Is the hardware available? Which type of hardware is available? And then we also raise awareness of the whole ecosystem in which both parents contribute, teachers contribute, the state contributes. So it's a complex educational setup that needs to adjust to these developments. And for the future, I am very interested in exploring, as I guess many teachers are. I already did with my other colleague an educational intervention on teaching intellectual virtues to students in relation to AI. So that's definitely something that I can announce that will be published, because we got some relatively positive and encouraging results and presented them at the conference. And and as the last thing, I am very interested, and a lot of teachers are thinking about this, and that's the what happens with grading in this new setup of the AI expansion.
Yeah. Also, I think I just realized this paper, when I reached out to you for this conversation a few months ago, I did kind of skim this. This is the one, Global Justice and the Use of AI in Education, Ethical and Epistemic Aspects. Great. I'll put an overlay and also leave it in the show notes. Excellent. All right, Vlasta, last fun question for us to be a bit imaginative here. Let's say you were like Lee Kuan Yew, benevolent dictator. You could do whatever you wanted. And you could design an ideal university amidst the world of AI. What would that look like in your mind?
I would, first of all, not want to be a dictator.
Hey, man, personally, I would love to be a dictator, because I know I'll be a great fun. No, I'm joking. That was a joke.
That's very much against my convictions. So the first thing I would do, I would renounce that role. And I would like the diversity. and I would like people. I mean, what I would so what I could answer is kind of how I would envision as an idealist philosopher, how I would envision ideal university with AI.
Yeah, yeah. We'll put it that way. I had to say dictator just because
No, I
just
liked it.
fun.
I liked it, but that means for me to regulate, everyone on an upper level, and that's not in my dream, because I don't believe this is a kind of. I think it's more like if all of us can have certain values. So it's not for me about how to regulate the AI, but kind of which type of values we want and which expectations we want from the university. And that's not what a dictator can do. Dictator can regulate.
Dictate, yeah.
Exactly. Certain rules and behaviors, but not the way how we think. I mean, it can be influenced, but it's still... and there I would like this going more to this Humboldtian ideal, but with a modern shift, where we have the individual responsibility, intellectual curiosity, and we are together co-creating knowledge, contributing to the global pool of knowledge, and are sharing these life experiences, enriching our lives at universities, also throughout our education, building the friendship, building the skill set, building the memories, living our lives to some full potential, so to doing this self-realization, but all of us sharing this ideal. Yeah, sure, we are open to technology, we will use technology, but we will use it carefully. Technology is there to serve us, but we are there to design the values that we want the technology to follow. So we are in charge, and this technology should not only be human-centered, it should actually be environment-central, so world-centered, and should also be, we should also be conscientious of of the environment and the animals and the responsibility that we have towards the whole ecosystem, and not just to the humankind.
Yeah, what you're saying there, it rings to me this, my mentor and master's supervisor, Ines, she introduced me to this concept called symbiosis, it comes from, I think, Donna Haraway, this idea of making together or making with or making together, the notion that in activist philosophy, it's this idea that in a way, our deepest subjective self is constantly in relation with our environment, our external world, and we're kind of constructing ourselves as we construct the world and enact the world outside. But then the symbiosis notion is that in a way, this is not just this has to be viewed not from like an individual making themselves through the environment, but rather the environment also making itself together, and so the term you use there was ecosystem, and I think so. In fact, eventually I'm hoping a lot of my work, if I do get into more research, would be around this notion of how can we have ecosystems of intelligence, and not just view these terms like AI agents, or kind of using AI as some slave to help with our work, but rather how can we create ecosystems of intelligence with humans, potentially machines, but also importantly, as you mentioned, even the environment, even other things that aren't really, let's call it, not to make it anthropocentric. But it's great. I mean, also, I'll just say this. If I was a dictator, I'll be a benevolent one and make education free, which is why I think Australia should make me a dictator for one day, like Mr. Trump said. So you'll always get free education.
I really love what you said about the bigger picture for your future research. And it's a great note to finish this conversation. I really wish for this to happen for you. And I will also strongly support your quest for the free education. And I must say that's not something that crossed my mind, because I did enjoy free education during the largest part of my life. But of course, when we are aware that unfortunately a lot of people don't have that, of course, this is a big and an important point.
Yeah. Well, as per usual, Vlasta, this has been so fun, and thanks a lot for just humoring all of my eccentric questions, but also kind of talking about more of the empirical work you've been doing. It was wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you.